Hello and welcome back to another Blu-ray review. It's been a while since I've done one of these, like sat down and done a full in-depth one, but I'm looking forward to it because this is a film that I really enjoyed recently, and as soon as I finished watching it, I thought I got to do a full whack for this one because there's just so much to it, and I thought that the extras on this release were brilliant, and so I thought it was worth doing a full. See, I wish I could do this for every Blu-ray. I just can't. Don't have the time. But I'm going to put the time into this one. This one is Heart of Stone, which is spine number 319 in the Masters of Cinema collection. This is a German film, East German film from 1950, directed by, and I'll say Paul Verhoeven, but I might slip into saying Paul Verhoeven at times. It's actually interesting because I thought, wow, like I know that Paul Verhoeven was kind of a pretty legendary director and has made many films that I'm very familiar with, like Total Recall, RoboCop, and stuff like that. Showgirls is certainly up there, and there is a sequence in this actually. There's a fairly kind of focused set piece around like a dance, and I thought that maybe when he got to making Showgirls, there was probably some kind of he had some experience then filming kind of dance sequences and stuff. Although looking at when this film came out as compared to when Paul Verhoeven was born, he would have been about 12 when he made this, which is really impressive. But I really didn't know what to expect from this film when I first saw just like the images from it and stuff when Eureka first announced it. But I loved just I don't know, just some of the kind of special effects shots that kind of were teased in that kind of trailer they put out, where it's just like you got this. I mean, it's even in the booklet somewhere. There's like a nice. I'll just grab it for you now. There's a nice image of the kind of, which I think is kind of a production still actually, but it's indicative of the shot in the actual movie itself, where you have this giant man and it's set in this big valley, and there's our hero at the bottom there. I just really love that visual. And I thought, ooh, if this film can sustain that kind of wonder for like a fairy tale movie, then I think this might be something I'll enjoy quite a bit. So, 1950, directed by Paul Verhoeven, obviously a different director than the one I was talking about. It is based on a 1827 story by Wilhelm Hauff, which is Das Kalte Herz. And again, I wish I would love to be able to pronounce everything, and I'll give it my best college try here and there, but forgive me if I'll slip into saying Hannah Rucker instead of Hannah Rucker, as the lead actress of this film playing Lisbeth. I'll try. I'll do my best, but I might slip here and there. I find I often I get inside my own head and I stumble over stuff when I try and get everything as correct as I can, and I have been beaten over the head verbally by some people for trying to pronounce things correctly. So that's just one of those things we'll have to kind of roll with this video. So, adapted from, this kind of, fairy tale story from like the early 1800s. The Cold Heart, or in this case, Heart of Stone, is about this man called Peter who, I really like. See, this is one thing that I noted. I guess I'll just dive right into it. I really liked how Peter's character was informed by the makeup. The first time we see him, he's kind of working in the forest, and he's got coal all over his face. He's like he's a coal maker, and he kind of, I don't know exactly what that involves really, but that's his work, and he actually gets kind of called a coal rat as a kind of derogatory term by the people in the village. The people are a lot better off than he is, and that kind of becomes the impetus of the entire story, is how he feels about his own status in society and how he wants to move further, and he wants to kind of become more wealthy and be able to actually be considered as a suitor to this young woman Lisbeth, who you later find out that they kind of grew up together, kind of, they're quite friendly. These two very attractive young leads in the film, they go together very nicely on screen. I actually think that this romance that kind of is pivotal, I think, to the whole story, is what makes the whole film work. I think the chemistry between the actors. So we have Lutz Moik playing Peter Monk, and we have Hannah Rucker playing Lisbeth. there's a sequence at the beginning where he's finished his work for the day and he goes to the village, and they're having this big folk festival, and there's this dance that's going on, and she eventually becomes the queen of the dance because she's young, pretty, popular, and people have their eyes on her and stuff, and want to marry her. But she's dancing, and she comes through this procession, and she locks eyes with Peter, and it's just this magnetic moment that I think, instantly it's like, well, I thought it was like a meet cute, it's like this is the moment where our kind of central romance begins, but you find out later on when they're talking that they were friends when they were younger, and they kind of drifted apart, and obviously she's a bit better off than he is, and he is just this simple worker in the woods, but he's looked down upon, and they call him the coal rat, because it's interesting how those terms get thrown around. And just generally speaking, I think the way that society views people with menial jobs, or but then again, it's really kind of different, isn't it? Because you have someone who works in a shop like me, and I can attest to the fact that not to transpose this to a modern setting, but like, I get looked down upon just by the way people look at me, the way people talk at me, because I stack shelves, or I work on tills, and you do get looked down upon like you're dirt, basically, by a lot of people. And when you see hundreds of people a day, it happens a lot. Yeah, if it's someone who is like like a builder, or like a hard grafter, then that they're respected, and then it's very different. I just going into this is me. I was once in work, and I was sat down on a stool because I got bad knees because I used to wrestle when I was younger. I was sat on a stool, and I was like rearranging something, and this guy just walks up to me, and he's just like, "Why do you never smile?" I was like, "Fucking what?" He's like, "I never see you smiling." And I said to him, "What, you expect me to be sat here looking at a shelf just smiling at nothing?" He's like, "I work hard graft, 80 hours a week, mate. I'm always smiling. I'm always happy. You should cheer up a bit." And I'm just like, what is this? Like, the way people put their own expectations, I find it really weird when people look down upon you from the job that you have, or the, your status in society. And that is ultimately, for Peter, to get back to the movie, is kind of yearning for. He wants change. He wants to build up something and have money, have wealth, have status. And there's this kind of, I guess he was born on a certain day, and he's a child of Sunday, and he talks to his mother about how, "I'm going to go into the woods, I'm going to meet the glass imp who's going to give me all of my dreams and wishes and stuff." And that's ultimately what he does. He goes into the woods, and he meets this mystical creature. There's two mystical creatures in the woods in this story: the glass imp and Dutch Michael. And the glass imp is played by Paul Bilt. He is a very good actor. I've seen him in a couple of films now, and I like his kind of his. I don't know. There's something to his. You just like an actor, you just like watching them perform. And the glass imp is a strange figure who feels and looks different at different times in the film, but he's kind of a cheeky type. He's not your typical kind of genie from the lamp who's going to grant three wishes. He's a bit more. I don't know, that there's a bit more of an edge to him than that, I found. And so eventually Peter meets him in the woods, and he says, "Well, I can give you three wishes. Two I'll grant immediately, and the third one is dependent on how wisely you use your first two wishes." And Peter, he's just this young kid, and he's excited and, naive, and he picks these two really bad ones. One is he wants to own the glass-making factory and to run that business. And it's already set up earlier on that that's kind of running out of fashion a bit and is not going to be as profitable. So he doesn't really have the business savvy for it, regardless of, whether he will know anything about the glassmaking industry. Just the fact that he's not even aware that it's kind of on the outs, is a bad choice. And then the second one is he wants to have as much money in his pocket when he walks into the local tavern as Ezekiel, who is the local kind of rich prick, basically, who's set up very, very, very smartly as the kind of just, shit-eating villain of the film, really. And you can kind of look at Dutch Michael as a villain of the film, too, but I think Ezekiel is just this really, and the guy who plays him, I think, is so great, Paul Esser. He just, and he's not afraid to look slimy either. There's when he's drunk and stuff, and his hair's all greasy, and he sees this sweat all over him and stuff, and he just looks kind of really gross, and just that kind of indulgent kind of rich prick. Again, rich prick is the best term to use, I think, for a character like Ezekiel. I loved how near the beginning of the film I'm jumping all over the place. Sorry, I apologize. But near the beginning of the film in the village, and it's set in the Black Forest, and I really loved the just seeing those gorgeous, real life visuals. When they shoot a lot of stuff on location, there's a fair bit of stage work going on here, especially with the more fantastical sequences in the woods when you get deeper in and the sunlight is kind of gone. But there's a lot of stuff on location. It looks absolutely gorgeous, I think, and the color in the film too. This was kind of a big thing when this film came out. It was the first film in East Germany shot in color film. Agfa film, I think it was called. I noted it down somewhere. But that was kind of a big sell, was that it was kind of, rivaling, Technicolor and all these other processes that, was still not exactly the norm, I suppose, around that time. And you get a lot of stuff in black and white throughout the 40s, but also just I think the availability, but also just the sheer cost of it around the time of post-war in Germany was something that was kind of a part of that too. But it looks gorgeous, the colors and the visuals. The transfer on the film I thought was really good. There's been some talk about it online about how it's waxy and it's smeared over and stuff. I really think that's overblown. There is grain on it. I don't know if it's been added on after the fact or not, but I really thought the film looked great. I can tell that it's been tweaked a little bit digitally, and I wish they wouldn't do that, but for the most part, I think it looked really good. And the visuals are just so amazing in the film that I had no issues with the transfer or anything like that. And I know that's been kind of a hot topic for these DIFA releases from the East German film studio that Eureka have been putting out recently with the Strange New World sci-fi box set, which is fantastic, and The Sons of Great Bear, and then coming up soon is the Rubble box set. Anyway, they're doing a lot of DIFA stuff, and there's been some kind of controversy there, but I think this one looks fantastic. So where was I going with this? So the village, which again is like, that must have been an existing location. There's no way they built all those buildings and stuff. You can see people inside. There's no way they would build like fully working houses and all that kind of stuff just for this film. If they did, holy shit, that's amazing. But I'm pretty sure these must have been existing buildings in this location where they shot it. But there's this great opening shot that reminded me of like High Noon, actually. Not High Noon. I'm thinking of another Western I saw recently. I don't watch many Westerns. High Noon was probably the last Western I watched. What was the other one? 40 Guns. There's a great sequence in 40 Guns that begins at one end of that kind of, that typical Western street. And it follows the characters all the way down, and then other characters come in, and it's just this amazing kind of wanna. And this one has a similar shot. It's not as long. I counted as 2 minutes and 20 seconds. It opens near kind of the middle of the street maybe, and it's these guys doing like an archery competition or something. There's people everywhere. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the foreground, the background. We first meet Ezekiel, and we kind of find out what he's like immediately. Sets him up as kind of just not a good dude, and then we follow him, and he's kind of being a bit of a bully. And then the camera pans around. We see Hannes, who's this another kind of smarmy kind of rich type who's after Lisbeth, and then we see her, she's introduced, and then just the way that the camera is slowly moving in this one shot and all this stuff, it's so impressive. And it doesn't announce itself as a one shot kind of thing either. I think it was done really well, and in general the cinematography I thought was beautiful in the film. But to go back to the woods and Peter and the glass imp, his second wish, I think I was mid-wish when I got completely distracted by other things. His second wish is to have as much money in his pockets when he goes into the local tavern and Ezekiel is there, and to have as much money as him, which is kind of, well, he's the rich guy, so I want to have as much money as he has. And sure enough, he goes into the tavern and the coins appear in his pocket. But the trouble that Peter has is that, again, the glass industry is going down, and number two, Ezekiel goes to Amsterdam. I think it's Amsterdam. So when he's not there, he can't fill his pockets up with money anymore. It's a stupid wish, and the glass imp even says something to the effect of, like, you should wish for a better brain. Like, honestly, that's what you're going to use your wishes on, but he can't be kind of swayed and, makes these poor decisions. He does have a brief encounter with Dutch Michael in the forest, and he runs away, and that's a very striking introduction to the other mystical, figure in the woods. And that character, Dutch Michael, is played by Erwin Geschonek.
Mein Schnee! Peter! Mein Graben ist meine Grenze! Sieh dort, in Holland gibt's Gold!
He, for me, is like the best character of the film. and he's not in it for very long, but his presence is just so brilliantly portrayed by the actor, but also the makeup and the lighting and the cinematography and the special effects photography by Ernst Kunstmann, like just the having the kind of, I thought it was forced perspective, but apparently it's the Shiftan process, which Kunstmann worked with Shiftan on apparently back in the silent era, which was kind of pioneered for some silent films like Metropolis, where you have an element that is put onto the it's in camera, an in-camera effect where a mirror is placed at like a 45-degree angle, and then you cut out the parts where you want to, it can be a model that is made to look huge on screen. It saves a lot of money and stuff, but you can make things look bigger and smaller and things like that. So it's very, inventive and stuff. And to see those sequences where you have Peter and Dutch Michael, and there's this huge difference in size, is really cool. Though I will say there's a moment where they both become the same size, and it looks like Peter's a bit taller than than the actor who plays Dutch Michael. It takes away the intimidation factor just a little bit. Whereas there's a sequence where they kind of sat together as Dutch Michael is luring Peter into his spell, and they must have done something where they're sat, because he appears taller, as he needs to be in that scene, just physically and visually, to be this kind of, there's a lot to be said about just placing someone in a higher position than someone else to convey something psychologically, and they certainly do that in that scene. But I just found his look, his mannerisms, Dutch Michael, it's what I would call a complete performance. This guy, there's just something about him that's so believable, even though he is this kind of mystical creature in a way. And he's devious, and, like he has this booming laugh. And I find sometimes when villains do that, it must be very difficult to pull off in a convincing way, and he pulls it off in a convincing way. And I just think he's such a great actor, and he just, that character, whenever he was on screen, I was captivated by every single second. So it becomes this morality tale and this fable, if you will, of Peter, and how when he does kind of get these wishes and they come true, he literally gambles it all away, and life becomes very difficult for him, and he has to go on this well, I was going to say adventure. It's definitely not an adventure, a journey, a dark journey, if you will, as he eventually decides to go and see Dutch Michael. And this is where the title of the film comes from, the story. And Dutch Michael promises Peter millions. And that's the key difference between Dutch Michael and the Glass Imp. The Glass Imp isn't promising anything. He's offering opportunity, in a sense, to these wishes, whereas Dutch Michael is offering the world. And Peter is lured into this very, very easily, because he's desperate. And he says, your problem is your heart, You have empathy and you have emotion. You need to get rid of that. And I can do that for you. I can take your heart away. And he said, what will I do without a heart? He said, well, I'll give you another heart, but it'll be a heart made of stone. And that's what you need to succeed. And it's such an interesting concept, because you then get this grisly sequence where we go into the bowels of Dutch Michael's kind of hovel, this cave where he lives, and there's this wall of like beating hearts that are just affixed to the wall, these red pumping, and there's names underneath all of them. And you see Hannes, and you see Ezekiel's name. They've sold their soul to the devil, and that's why they're succeeding in life. And it just made me think about real life, and how you have these figures who you just think like they've risen to such prominence and to such insane wealth. You just think like, have they lost their humanity somewhere along the way? And in some cases you can just tell that they have, and it just seems crazy to me. And so in my head I was just imagining the camera panning along, and you just see Elon's name on there, Bezos, Trump, That's where my mind went to. I was just like, well, they probably made their own heart of stone deal, surely, because how else could you be that ruthless and that kind of anti-humanity, Let's not get into politics and stuff. But anyway, so I love that concept of the fact that he has this literal stone heart, and that allows him to be ruthless and to really succeed. And he goes to Amsterdam, and he kind of becomes very wealthy. And as I said, the makeup, to go back to that point I made like 25 minutes ago, with Peter at the beginning, the coal on his face, and when he shows up at the village kind of dance at the festival, You know, he's got all the coal across his face, and he looks not very presentable, and they call him the coal rat and stuff. But when he's out in the woods and stuff, and his complexion is very fair, and he's full of kind of hope and kind of life and enthusiasm to kind of to make his dreams come true. But he's taken a shortcut to do it. But once he gets all that money and all that wealth, the makeup on him is very subtly changed. He's more sallow. He looks a bit sickly, and it's almost as if the influence of all this money and this fast tracked wealth is literally draining away his soul. And what's interesting about the story for me is that you see these kinds of stories in media, whether it's film, TV, books, of a character who kind of takes that dark route and goes for greed and that lust for power and all that kind of stuff. It made me think of Breaking Bad, the scene where he's kind of counting all his gold coins on his desk. Made me think of that moment in Breaking Bad where Skyler's like, how much is enough? How big does this pile of money need to be? And you have someone who at the beginning you're rooting for and who you liked, and you see them go down a path of that you cannot follow morally. But in this case, it's difficult because that it's because he has no heart. Now obviously the conceit of like your heart being your soul and everything, it's bullshit. It's all up here. This is what makes you. The heart is just this organ, this vital organ that pumps the blood around your body, but it's a poetic symbol of your soul and your goodness, and the purity of spirit is your heart. And works in it, especially in a story like this, which is very symbolic in itself in a fairy tale. But it's almost kind of a get out of jail for free card, I think, for the character of Peter, who has this literal stone heart. But I liked the kind of the questioning of that when he does something really bad and he regrets it. And he goes to the glass imp and he's just like, look, my heart can't be completely gone because I feel this remorse and this regret. Please help me, And so it's about him trying to find his soul again and to get the heart back. So I loved the film. I thought the central performances were really good. I liked the actress who played Lisbeth. But like I said, the chemistry between them and that kind of budding romance at the beginning was so brilliant, and it was done so perfectly with no words. When they first lock eyes in the movie, there's just an instant kind of magnetic chemistry there, I feel like. And so I'm invested. I love a good romance, so I'm invested in those two getting together. I'm invested in that. And so when he goes down this path that kind of is difficult for her to follow as well, it pulled more on my heartstrings because she is portrayed as this kind of a pure spirit, a pure character. And he could have had it all, like things would have gone fine, and she doesn't need him to be wealthy and rich. She just needs him to be him. And to kind of forget about what the village or the townspeople might think about them being an item. For her, it's just about him, but he feels like he needs to be more, and it's that kind of that dangerous mindset. But like I said, the cinematography beautiful, and a lot of it's just brilliantly staged. There's just a really random specific point in the film is when Ezekiel is kind of stumbling out of the tavern. He's drunk. This is when he first calls Peter the coal rat. And he comes down out of the building. From my memory, I watched this film about a week ago. And you got the people there and they're kind of milling about and stuff. And then in the background, you got this kind of, it's not a sunset, but it's almost like a dusky kind of inky sky. And, I'm assuming this was done on location as well because, the main village, location is in a real location. It would be bonkers if they built that all for a nighttime shot. So it must be the same place. So they must have waited for the perfect point in time where the sky looked like that, which gives the shot definition and a greater depth. And then, they've also placed a couple of extras way off in the distance and stuff. So I just love when you have a real depth of image like that. I just was it's a very strange piece of minutiae to be impressed with. I just remember that shot thinking, man, that looks really cool because you can see so far back. and it creates an immersion of the world that they're set in the story. And even though the world is very small and it's this kind of quaint little village in the woods, but that adds so much, I think, when you really think about the depth of that and placing the extras back there to give you the sense of that depth. I don't know, it just makes things feel bigger and more real, and I like stuff like that. I think the film does a great job with that, and so for the cinematography and direction and the staging, I think the film really thrives, and there's just these great moments of fantasy as well in the woods when Peter's there to see the imp and Dutch Michael. There's a really strange sequence when you first see the glass imp, and he's kind of like a squirrel, and there's these, I'm gonna say probably dead birds that they've kind of reanimated using stop motion. That's, you know, I don't know what the tone is they're meant to be striking with that, but it felt a bit macabre to me, where like that's definitely probably, it's like, you know, what David Lynch did at the end of Blue Velvet, you know, but a bit more subtly. But this is not very subtle, it's just like, it's stop motion dead animals probably. I don't think that it was meant to make me feel the way that it did. It was like, oh, that's a bit grim, you know. But then this film is a bit grim, and apparently that was something that this film struggled with when it was made, because on the one hand it was tying into the kind of socialist ideals. What was it, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic? Because I find that interesting, is that films would need to be approved, you know, as for like, what's the message, like what are we saying here, like they're very, you know, almost stifling, you know, creatively really, but they'd have to work around that. And in this film, you know, it was deemed that there was a Soviet film that was released a few years earlier that was a Fairytale movie, but it was not quite as dark and didn't have these kind of grim elements that this film does have. It's not extreme though. I mean, there's a moment where someone's head gets kind of busted open, and there's a trickle of blood that comes down, and that was deemed shocking and extreme, which is hilarious to think about now. But of course, you've got to think about the fact that this is, you know, 75 years ago, in a much different climate. But so the film did struggle with even just the sequence of the hearts on the wall, and that being a particularly grim element. And actually, apparently, that was removed from the film in later screenings, and it was kind of, you know, and it's just I'm so completely like uneducated in all the stuff around what happened in Germany post World War II. I talked about that in my review of The Silent Star. This is all new to me, because I guess I didn't pay too much attention in history, but you know, this idea of East Germany, West Germany, and then the different zones of occupation and the influences of those as well. And then obviously in East Germany, there's that kind of Soviet socialist leaning to a lot of the stuff that was being put out in cinemas and with films. So I find that interesting, but it's still something I'm fairly, you know, not that well educated on. But I find it interesting. And the idea that the director, Paul Verhoeven, was from West Germany, or was making films in West Germany, and so they blamed the kind of, you know, the transgressions of the darker elements of Heart of Stone on, well, it's because he's a West German director, you know. It's just, there was another thing actually that I forgot to mention when talking about that big one shot that goes through the whole village. There's this little bit where a guy is selling these kinds of ornaments, and that's setting up by name literally the glass imp and Dutch Michael as these kind of mythical you know, figures in the community and in the Black Forest. And there's another little tiny bit where one of the lower level villains who kind of works under Ezekiel, he goes up to a man who's with his daughter on this kind of swing ride, and he says something to the effect of, oh, I see that, you know, you can't pay your debts, but you can afford to put your daughter on this ride. I'll remember that, you know, and makes him really uncomfortable. And that kind of sets up the real importance of money in this community, which kind of lends a lot of weight to how much, you know, our main character kind of spirals, you know, through kind of the way that he needs money, and then the way that he desires and craves it, and the importance of it, which is kind of a little bit set up in that little exchange, I thought. And there was one other detail that I only picked up when going through the film again for clips. You see Ezekiel kind of absent-mindedly tracing, in kind of probably spilled beer or something on the table, a heart. And so he's kind of maybe subconsciously thinking of his own heart, the one that he's already given away to Dutch Michael. He's made that pact. He has his own heart of stone, and I just love that little... It's fairly subtle, but at the same time, it's kind of a shot that pans out from it. But I thought it was kind of an watching it again. I was like, oh yeah, because of course that would be on his mind, the knowing that he has sold his soul to the devil essentially. So that was a cool detail. I like that. But otherwise, Heart of Stone as a film, we'll wrap up my thoughts on that. I loved it, and there's just lots of different details that I thought were really good. And I think it only happens twice in the film, but there's these two whip pan transitions where the camera whips away from what we're seeing into like the trees, and then it cuts to a different location, and it's a simple cut, but it's fun. It's fun visually. I like that stuff. And another random thing I wanted to mention was this a scene where Lisbeth is doing some ironing, doing a spot of ironing, and this iron that she's using, it's a fucking metal. Like it. Well, obviously it's metal, but like it's a metal looking iron. It's like got a fucking dragon on the hand. Just such a random, like, I suppose it's kind of gothic, I suppose, which the film has a touch of the gothic to it, but it just seems so random that she's using this, like, really, like, it just seems like something Ozzy Osbourne would use to do his ironing, rest in peace. So that was just a random thing that I thought was kind of funny. And yeah, there's not too much more I could kind of really mention, although this is something I was kind of, pat myself on the back for. When I was watching the film, I thought, this feels a little bit like a Heimat film. And then I put the commentary on, and Sean Allen, I believe, is the guy who did the commentary for this film, and he's like, the Heimat film. I was like, yes, like I knew something, And then he goes into a whole like 20-minute spiel about the Heimat film, and it's a lot deeper than I could have possibly thought, but interesting as well. I like all that stuff, and the film I loved. Just the mystical quality to it was really cool, and I was really embroiled in the personal drama of Peter and this romance, and will he get it right? Will he sort things out? And the ending, I think, is that's probably the thing that kind of holds me back a little bit on like fully saying like, yes, masterpiece. The ending felt a little hollow, but at the same time, it is a fairy tale, and I think that it operates in that realm. And it's, well, to me, it's not meant to be kind of a realistic kind of story, but I don't know. I was like, yeah, I guess it's kind of what I wanted, but do I buy it? I don't know. I don't know if I bought the ending, but I admittedly was kind of spirited away by the moment that the ending begins, when he takes his axe and he plunges it into the tree, and the camera pulls back, and yeah, there's just some really cool stuff in those incredible sets as well, like these full forest sets. I mean, obviously there's probably like matte paintings behind to trick the depth a bit, but I mean, there's these huge tree trunks moving around, and it's just the scale of it is enormous, and there's just some beautiful imagery in those sections, plural, of the film that I really loved. It felt a bit like some of the stuff in like some of the old Disney films brought to life, Anyway, Hearthstone. Now let's talk about all the extras. Yeah, there's a whole lot to get through with this. Let's take a look at the package itself first. I love this artwork by Carly AF. It's just a gorgeous piece. Just the composition of it, the colors, you can kind of see the glass imp there in very small form, and the striking kind of visage of Dutch Michael there. I love the name Dutch Michael as well, but it's just, I don't know, it's just something about it. It's really cool. And that scar and the eye that just is the mood. Like, it's just such a great piece. I absolutely love it. On the back, you get the rundown of the plot, and talking about the Defer Film Studio, which was dissolved in 1992 for obvious reasons. And we have a rundown of all the extras and stuff. Some nice images from the film. That burning house there as a model shot, which is really nice. I just love all the little things that, just the practical effects, and, these things would all be done in CG now, and it just doesn't have the same charm, I don't think. But there you go, that's the slipcover. If we take a look on the inside here, I'm not sure if this is an original poster. It looks like it is, but I like that there's a different one there. And then on the back, we have all of the same information. On the inside, we have the disc, which actually also has that same shot of Peter and Dutch Michael from the back of the booklet. And behind, we have a shot of the glass imp there and Peter, which you can't quite really see that well, but it's always nice to have a bit of inside artwork. Then we have the booklet, a shot of Peter there, and his glorious hair that I'm assuming must have been a wig. On the inside we have the rundown of the cast and the crew, a nice shot of the tree there in the forest, and there is an essay in this booklet titled On Wealth and Humanity in Difa's Heart of Stone by Quina Shen. I really enjoyed this because I went through all the extras on the disc first, and then I read the booklet, and it just had little bits, little morsels of information that weren't elsewhere on the set. So I always like that when you do a full run through of extras on a Blu-ray, and there's crossover with some of the information, but for the most part you get something new in each kind of area, which I really liked. So this talks about obviously the film itself, Heart of Stone, but also about the film studio, and again, like I was saying, the things about how the film was, some of the scenes were cut out, and the not censorship, but kind of let's move away from that and let's change certain elements of the source material. And it talks about in the essay about the differences between the original story from 1827 and the film adaptation. Got some nice production shots there as well again, and some stills from the movie. And I also like this poster, which is kind of cool. I'm not sure what country that's from exactly, but it's a cool poster. It does seem to be that shot and that image of Peter and Dutch Michael is kind of one of the ones that people focus on, rightly so, when kind of showcasing the visual allure of the film itself. But yeah, that's the booklet there. And let's talk about the on-disc extras. It is worth noting that the English subtitles on the main feature and accompanying shorts are newly revised for this release. So there's commentary by DIFA historian Sean Allen, author of Screening Art, Modern Aesthetics, and the Socialist Imaginary in East German Cinema. Really enjoyed this commentary. I thought he had a lot of great insight, talked a lot about the Heimat film, and really got me interested in checking out the Heimat TV series, which has been released by Second Sight, only the first season though. And he said, was it like you could do worse than checking out Edgar Wright's Heimat film series from 1984. I was like, Edgar Wright's? Well, I looked it up. It's Edgar Wright's, like not Edgar Wright. Yeah. And he also talks about a lot of stuff around just the climate in which this film was made, and the socialist messaging, and whether it's there, whether it's not. There's one bit that I kind of revved up against, where he kept saying that the only piece of magic in the film is kind of the ending, and the ending is this wish that's granted, basically. I won't spoil it. And while it is a big wish, I still think, being able to magic money into your pockets whenever you walk into a tavern is magic. I still think having your heart taken out and a stone put inside it, and you can still walk around and live and breathe and function, is magic. But I guess what he means is it's a different kind of magic, but it's one of those little things that I've become a pedantic shit over. But I really enjoyed the commentary. It was very, very interesting. And I like learning a lot of this stuff because, there's so many things I wish I could learn and retain. But when you're going through these Blu-rays and listening to commentaries and video essays, documentaries, I'm not going to retain half of this stuff, but I find it interesting in the moment, and some of it will stick, But I really enjoy the commentary. I'm becoming more picky about kind of critic commentaries and stuff. I find that, not everyone can do it that well. I think he did a good job of talking about things that are happening on screen and kind of dissecting some of the moments of the film and the character beats, and then also talking about the behind the scenes stuff, which I find very interesting. So I really enjoyed the commentary for this release. On the disc for video extras, we have Once Upon a Time in the East, a new interview with Soviet cinema expert Claire Knight on Heart of Stone, and socialist children's media in the Eastern Bloc. I really liked this one. Full disclosure, I'm just going to be honest, I just edited an interview with Claire Knight for an upcoming release, and so spending like a week kind of going through the footage of her interview and stuff and editing it myself, I was so hyper aware of that when I was watching this that it became a bit difficult to focus. It was like a kind of dissonant thing, because I've become familiar with her speech patterns and where to cut and where not to cut and stuff. And not that it's done badly at all in this interview for Heart of Stone, but I was so hyper aware of it, it was kind of a weird watch for me. But I think she has a lot of great insight into that sort of stuff, and talking about the children's films and the fairy tale films as well that became popular. I mean, a lot of that stuff is covered in the audio commentary as well. But like I said, I think all of the kind of supplementary material on this, from the booklet to the video essay, the interview, and the commentary, they all have kind of different aspects to kind of reveal, which I thought was really good. And the interview was very good as well. I enjoyed it. And the video essay is titled Tales from the Black Forest, new video essay on Gothic horror folk tales, and Heart of Stone by film and literature scholar Mary Going. This is probably my favorite extra on the disc, I think. And it's kind of split into sections like Gothic horror, folk tales, and then Heart of Stone specifically, and tying that all together. It was nicely structured, I thought. But I loved just the stuff about literature and, again, folk tales and how that stuff is. It was just nice to hear like dates, like, the 1800s, or like this from 1795, whatever it was. And there were some nice illustrations used as well. I thought it was nicely edited and stuff. And I'm fascinated with the idea of the way stories travel and are reinterpreted. And I might be looking into this and kind of, this isn't really what she meant or whatever, but she was talking about how there were certain people who collected stories, And so for me, the way that I interpreted that was that, these stories would be passed around verbally, and they would change and, be tweaked and modified kind of naturally by the people who were receiving them and then telling them to someone else. And then it takes one person to say, well, I'm going to write this down. Then they become the author of that story in a sense, but they're also collectors. I like that term, collectors of stories. Oh God, I'm going to go on I'm going on a really stupid tangent here, but I like to kind of inject these personal stories if I can. But we need to go back 20 years to do this. Bear with me. I think it's a good story. 20 years ago, I'm in the south of France, or on my way to the south of France, on a holiday with my dad and my stepmom in this big clunky camper van. But to get to the south of France, we were going to Annecy, I believe, in the French Alps. In a camper van, you got to drive from the top of France down to the bottom, and it felt like it took 4 days. It was probably like a day and a half. But there was one day where we were just driving all day, and it was just sunflower fields as far as the eye could see. It was just I was bored shitless, sat up front with my dad, and to pass the time and to kind of preserve his own sanity, I think he started telling me these very long jokes, the kind of dog and bone stories where he would just like lead me on for like 45 minutes, and then there'd be no punchline. And he'd find that hilarious, and I would just be even more pissed off, which ironically is kind of the stuff that I find funny now. So you always end up finding yourself becoming your parents in some way, shape, or form, in different elements. Anyway, he told me this one joke, and I'm like, oh my God, another one, called Colin, the most famous man in the world. This is the title of the joke. And they went on and on and on, and I just could tell he was just getting giddy the longer it went on. And then he got to the punchline, and it's a fucking amazing punchline. It's a great joke. I loved it. It was the perfect thing to get me out of the mood that I was in. And I just thought it was a brilliant joke that to this day we still kind of talk about and laugh about. Now, a few weeks later, maybe a few months later, I'm back in college, and my best friend, or one of my best friends, he was doing music, I was doing film and TV, completely different areas of the college. We never saw each other interact in college whatsoever. We'd see each other in the mornings at like the Cardiff bus station on the way to college. I told him this joke, because of course I would, because humor's a big part of our friendship. So he must have told someone else in college. I'm in the back of a bus one day, I don't know anyone on this bus, and there's these two girls, and one of them goes, have you heard this joke about Colin, the most famous man in the world? And I'm sat there listening to it, just the smile on my face. I'm just trying to cover it and stuff. And it's so close to the version my dad told, but also slightly different based on the fact that I told it slightly differently, and my friend probably told it slightly differently. But to see that in real time, how these stories travel, and how, yeah, the baseline is very similar, but it just, through the way the person is telling it, through the tone and the intonation, it becomes different. And so I love that, and that's something I really enjoyed about the video essay. I know that was a horrible tangent, but I'm fascinated by that and how that works. But these days, it's very much like, you make a film, or you write a story, and it's just like, oh, well, where'd that come from? Like, is that a remake? Is that a rip-off? Are you bastardizing someone else's work? And way back when, it was a bit more loose than that, until someone wrote it down and kind of claimed themselves. Because again, it was the cold heart purely from the mind of Wilhelm Hauff, or was it something that had been told for hundreds of years before that? I don't know, but I find that interesting, and I really enjoyed the video essay and how it kind of tied all that into the film itself, and the background of, again, gothic horror, and the darker side to some of those kind of grim tales. And she goes into the Brothers Grimm as well, but also other kind of notable figures of those tales. I really enjoyed it. And then we have 3. Oh, and I love that they put the director on the back of the Blu-ray. That's very good, because I didn't note it down. I like to kind of credit the director, even if it's a short film on an extra of a Blu-ray. There's 3 short animated films that kind of tied into folk tales and kind of fairy tales. So the first one is The Bremen Town Musicians from 1954, directed by Bruno J. Botke. I'm just going to go with that, unfortunately. So this is a DIFA animated short film. They're all around 15 to 20 minutes, I think. So The Bremen Town Musicians is a silhouette animated film. And it's about these 4 different animals from like a farm who are kind of, they're not appreciated anymore, and they go on an adventure. And there's these dastardly figures that they kind of thwart by the end. I really enjoyed it, and I love silhouette animation. I've seen and love the Adventures of Prince Ahmed by Lotte Reiniger, who pioneered, I would say, this form, because it's the oldest surviving feature-length animated film from 1926, I believe. And when I first watched that, I was like deep into my silent film session. I thought, wow, it's a silhouette film. It's not going to be great, is it? But it'll be interesting enough. Fuck me, amazing, absolutely exquisite film. I recommend anyone to see it. Beautiful. What you can do with just bits of cardboard and color tinting in that time, it's just incredible. But just like and even in these short films, because you're looking at characters in profile, right, and they have exaggerated facial features, like the big eyelids, or the kind of eyebrows, or the brow, and like the nose and stuff, and the mouth and the chin. But there's an expressiveness, and there's expression, and they're kind of silent films, really. There's a bit of narration going on, but there's not a lot of dialogue, and it's music, and it's visual, and even the way that like different shades are used to convey depth. Again, talking about depth of image again, like a valley with mountains in the background, and just, again, this is all flat. It's two-dimensional, right? And it is literal pieces of card just being photographed. But I just love all that stuff, man. It's so fucking cool. I really enjoyed The Bremen Town Musicians, but the one I loved the most was The Magic Ring by the same director from 1957, Bruno J. We'll go with Botka. Another silhouette film, and that one is about this young man who goes on this kind of spiritual journey in a way, and it's about this magic ring that this woman has lost, and so he's trying to help her to find it in this, I think it's kind of a mill. It's like a water mill, I think, or a sawmill. I think it's a water mill, and he stays to help her find this magic ring, but he can't find it, and so along the way he's just fixing the place up and stuff, and then through that hard work, the place becomes profitable again, and it's projecting this idea that, much like Heart of Stone, you shouldn't be looking for the easy way out, and it's kind of about greed, and I like that. It was really good, and just visually it was the best of the 3, I thought. And then finally we have, from 1958, by Crystal Weimer, Thumbelina's Adventures. Traditional animation, this one. I didn't like it that much. It was, it's about this flower sprouts, and Thumbelina is birthed, I guess, and goes on a number of adventures with different kinds of animals, and it just wasn't that engaging to me. I love animation. I'm always going to be in for watching animation, so I did not enjoy it, but I didn't find it particularly engaging compared to the other 2 films, I thought. There's a funny bit where she lands on a leaf, and there's this like a beetle or a bug, and it decides to use her to kind of dance with. And then when he's kind of like bored with her, he just kind of kicks her off. That's kind of funny to me. But apart from that, it was it was what it was. But the silhouette ones were just fantastic, I thought. And rounding all of that off, there is the original theatrical trailer, and what I really appreciated about that, I'm assuming, I mean, it must be based on what I'm seeing, they've taken the original theatrical trailer and then just used footage from the new master on the Blu-ray and kind of cut it in so that it looks really nice. And assuming there was no kind of unique imagery or kind of text on screen, you're basically getting a faithful reconstruction of the original trailer in nice quality. So I thought that was really cool. A very slow trailer, really. It's just kind of a collection of scenes, really. And that's what's always interesting to me, is how these films are sold through trailers and stuff from kind of contemporary times. I believe that's all I've got to say about Heart of Stone. And yeah, this felt like a ropey one to me. I apologize. Sometimes I feel really good about a review. This one, I feel like I conveyed everything I wanted to convey about it, but I didn't structure it very well. But you can't always film a winner, can you? But in the case of Heart of Stone, they definitely did, and it's a film I'll go back to, I think, time and time again. Just thinking about it now again, I want to watch it again. Not that I would, because I don't tend to rewatch films that much, because there could be another film I could watch. But if I had like the bookcase and About Time, I'd hop in it and watch this again right now, because it's a really good one. And talking about the kind of the socialist messaging, one thing that Claire Knight talked about in her interview is the fact that Peter isn't this kind of prototypical socialist kind of protagonist, because he isn't this kind of hard worker who will do the right thing, and he is a bit of a layabout who doesn't want to do the hard work and wants to just kind of get magic wishes, and he goes down the wrong path. Yet at the end of the film, there is this kind of sequence where he decides to join he doesn't go off to kind of become a coal maker again, which he does in the original story apparently, and prospers from there moving forward. But in the film, he decides to take up with a group of loggers, and he just kind of gets stuck in, like holding a big log, and then he's hammering down stuff, and he just becomes part of a collective, and that's kind of very much the message there. But he isn't your typical kind of socialist hero that you might see in other kind of fairy tale stories that are trying to push that message. But yeah, it's not stuff I'm hugely educated on, but I'm trying. And but just as a base movie, as a fairy tale film, as a piece of entertainment, I thought it was fantastic, and I loved it. And I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.
So, Peter, und nun vertraue dich dem Wasser an. Es ist kühl und kalt wie dein Herz. Nutze es und du wirst reich.